All right. I have actually two more stories. So I was thinking about the wake and remembered the story of when my nephew passed away. So he was a baby. This was a super devastating loss in our family. And so I told you about how people do death in our family in India. My the mom in this situation is not raised, in the same culture as we are, and the dad was. But he deferred to however she needed to grieve. I mean, honestly, the way that they grieved was like something I've never seen before, but they were already expecting their next baby when their son passed away. And so it was just something that they had to do. Like the way that they pulled together in this time, I mean, honestly, to this day, it's remains as superhuman. Actually, next week will be the anniversary of his death in 2006. So he would have been 18 years old this year. And he died of a leukemia, and very quickly. From diagnosis to death was about 17 days. So the time that they had to even wrap their brains around this was insane. But it was highly medicalized, right? He was in a hospital. He was hooked up to IVs. He was on steroids. And to extricate him from that was a feat. And the policies that they had to jump through to even take their own son away from medical treatment that was ultimately killing him and allow him a peaceful death was impossible. They actually weren't able to do it successfully. So he died there, but they were at least present with him when he did. But what was interesting to me, I think about it now, and it's still like incredibly devastating to me to think about what they had to endure and how little protection we were all able to offer them, right? Because of the culture in which their son died and the culture in which everyone was engaging them with. Protection is a privilege everywhere in life. That's a real social dimension of health. When we had the wake, he was dressed in a suit. He was all made up. And I think like the fire licking my grandfather's body, that was the part when I looked and I was like, I was like, that's not even him. Who did they put in there? And to have people witness him dead in a way that he had really never appeared in his life, because he was also changed from the medications, from the steroids in particular, was absolutely devastating. But unlike what would happened with my grandfather, there was no context for recognizing that feeling of like that gasp, right? There was nobody like, yeah, that's intense, right? Nobody's like, no, this is the way we do it. That's cool. That's good. This is normal. Nobody was allowed to say, this makes me uncomfortable, right? You just had to be cool with it. And I think that there are some cultural pieces for us, again, that like, well, this is just what happens. And then we do this thing, and then we do the next thing, and then we do the next thing, and then it's over, right? That happens in 24 to 36 hours, and then it's over. And this family goes home with no child after this experience of, I don't know how many people were there that day, 250, 300 people, all of them talking to them at the same time. No protection from the medical process, no protection from rando people just coming up to them being like blubbering all over them about their grief about their son. They hadn't even seen these people for 10 years. Honestly, who cares about your grief, rando from Spokane? We don't. But there's no place for that. And so I think about like protection as privilege, but also thinking about dignity. Where was the dignity for them in that process? I won't say there wasn't dignity for their son. They honored him in the way that felt most comfortable to them. It was shocking for me, but that it wasn't my choice to make, right? And it doesn't really matter what I thought of it, quite honestly. I think it's just important for me to reflect so that I have an understanding of maybe what I would like to have happen one day. The last story that I'll share is my best friend's story. So I actually just returned a couple weeks ago from Mexico, where we spread her ashes. It will be almost 5 years since she passed away, and I might cry when I tell the story. I thought going on this trip and spreading her ashes would feel like a relief. It felt anything but. It opened everything back up in a way that I thought I had very nicely compartmentalized. And that was a big shocker. And there is no space for that, right? We went on a trip for closure. It's almost been 5 years. Get over it already, right? Like, that's what we think about grief. I'll tell you about the ball in the box diagram in a second. This is not my thing, it's somebody else's thing. And then you can look it up online. It's exactly right for me about grief and death and dying. I will say that unlike some of these other experiences that I'm sharing with you, which are widely different in terms of culture, here was a person who was very much surrounded and protected. We had a very close crew of people who took care of her, who did her IVs. She went blind during her chemotherapy. She died of stage 4 ovarian cancer that was very aggressive and moved very quickly. And she lost her vision, her ability to work. She couldn't even look at her son's face. So she never even really saw him months before she died. It was devastating on so many levels, and also intensely beautiful to be able to be part of her death and dying all through those, all the way through hospice, sitting with her in hospice, holding her hand as she took her last breaths, fulfilling all of her wishes in the way that actually hospice allowed us to do, that hospitals do not. That was pretty fascinating to learn through this process. We wanted to do more, but the hospice folks were like, back off. And we're like, but we're healthcare providers. And they're like, stop. But she wanted to be dressed in a specific dress, and she wanted us to do her makeup because she wanted to be cremated while she still looked beautiful. So we did all that for her. And we drank rosé and played all her favorite songs. And honestly, it was beautiful. And she was suffering, and she was in a lot of pain in those last 6 weeks. And although none of us were ready for her to leave, we were all ready for her to be done with that part. But what happened even in the course of her dying and her death and after was a deep